This is LuxeMind Tactics, where the wealth mindset meets luxury living.
Donald Trump is a name that conjures immediate, vivid images. Gold-plated skyscrapers piercing the clouds, sprawling casinos glittering in the coastal night, and a specific brand of success so audacious, so unapologetically bold, it feels ripped directly from a Hollywood movie script. Donald Trump didn't just assemble an empire of steel and glass, he painstakingly constructed a myth around himself, a larger-than-life narrative of triumph. With towering ambition, he grabbed the New York skyline and bent it to his will, building a shimmering kingdom that ran on the high-octane fuel of pure, relentless ambition. But then, just as quickly as it rose, it all came crashing down. The foundation of debt he had so proudly built upon gave way, unleashing a tidal wave of bad deals and financial obligations. The very towers that once symbolized his absolute dominance morphed into monuments of his failure, stark reminders of a spectacular fall from grace. It was a collapse that would have buried any ordinary businessman. And yet, somehow, from the smoking rubble of that financial ruin, he clawed his way back. He didn't just recover. He emerged more powerful, more famous, and more formidable than ever before. This is the story of the epic deals, the crushing bankruptcies, and the almost unbelievable tactics he deployed to stage one of the most stunning and consequential comebacks in modern business history. To understand the empire, you must first understand the man, and to truly understand the man, you have to travel back to the beginning, to a world far removed from the penthouses of Manhattan. Donald Trump wasn't born in the sparkling, supercharged heart of the city, but in the outer borough of Queens, New York. He was the son of Fred Trump, a tough, notoriously frugal and highly successful real estate developer. Fred's kingdom was a formidable one, but it was built on a foundation of brick and mortar, sturdy, reliable, profitable, but ultimately unglamorous rent-controlled and middle-income apartment buildings in places like Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Fred taught his son the essential nuts and bolts of the business: construction, management, and the absolute importance of cultivating political connections. But for Donald, his father's world, a world of practicality and profit margins, just wasn't big enough. It lacked the one thing he craved above all else: glamour. From a very young age, Donald's eyes were locked on the glittering island across the river, Manhattan. He saw it then, as he sees it now, as the center of the world. While Fred was content building solid housing for the city's working and middle classes, Donald dreamed of building palaces for royalty, titans, and celebrities. In 1968, he officially joined his father's company, Elizabeth Trump and Son. But he was a restless apprentice. By 1971, he had taken control of the company, and around 1974, he gave it a new name: the Trump Organization. This was far more than a simple name change. It was a profound declaration of intent. The family business was about to get a major radical makeover, all in his own ostentatious image. His first big target was the old Commodore Hotel, a once grand dame of a building adjacent to Grand Central Terminal that had withered into a state of decay and disrepair. In the mid-1970s, New York City itself was a mirror of that hotel, teetering on the very edge of financial collapse. The city was a grim landscape of urban decay, graffiti-scarred subways, and pervasive crisis. But where nearly everyone else saw only ruin and despair, Trump saw a golden, once-in-a-generation opportunity. In his book, The Art of the Deal, he recalled how the hotel's lobby looked like a welfare hotel. But beyond the grime, he saw its superb location, a gateway through which thousands of wealthy commuters poured out of Grand Central every single day. This deal would become Trump's first masterpiece, a showcase of financial wizardry and audacious negotiation. He didn't just buy a hotel, he conducted a complex financial orchestra. First, he brought in the Hyatt Corporation, a respected and established name that lent the entire project instant credibility and operational expertise. Then, armed with Hyatt's letter of intent, he went straight to the city's power brokers. He argued that his project wouldn't just improve a block, it would single-handedly spark the renaissance of the entire neighborhood. He convinced the nearly bankrupt New York City government to grant him an almost unheard-of 40-year tax abatement. While not literally the first of its kind for a commercial property, The sheer size and generosity of the deal were staggering, saving the project tens of millions of dollars and making it financially viable. With the city's crucial blessing now in hand, he then turned to the banks. The lenders, suddenly confident in the city's backing and the area's revival, eagerly provided $70 million in construction loans. What rose from the Commodore's ashes was the Grand Hyatt Hotel, a sleek, modern tower of reflective glass that would become the signature Trump look. It opened its doors right as the 1980s economic boom was kicking off and was an immediate, spectacular success. It didn't just make Trump millions, it made him a star. He had proven he wasn't just a brash talker from Queens, he could deliver. The Grand Hyatt was the rocket fuel he needed to launch himself from the outer boroughs into the very heart of Manhattan real estate. With his newfound fame, a bulging bank account, and an unblemished track record, his next move was even bolder. He secured a prime location on Fifth Avenue, one of the most famous and expensive retail strips in the world, and set out to build his personal monument, Trump Tower. Finished in 1983, the 58-story skyscraper, with its dramatic 6-story brass and marble atrium and iconic indoor waterfall, was far more than a building. It was the physical embodiment of the Trump brand. It was unapologetically over the top, unabashedly luxurious, and it screamed success from every polished surface. In a move of symbolic perfection, Trump built his own lavish 3-story penthouse at the very top, literally and figuratively looking down on the city he had so decisively set out to conquer. The 1980s became a dizzying blur of expansion, flushed with success and fueled by what seemed to be a limitless line of credit from eager banks. Trump went on a wild buying spree. He was no longer just a developer. He was a cultural phenomenon, a brand. He dove headfirst into the flashy, high-stakes world of Atlantic City casinos, opening Trump Plaza in 1984 and following it with Trump's Castle in 1985. In a move that was less about financial strategy and more about collecting a world-famous trophy, he bought the iconic Plaza Hotel in Manhattan for over $400 million. He even launched the Trump Shuttle, a luxury airline, slapping his name across a fleet of Boeing 727s. He proudly and loudly called himself the King of Debt, having mastered the art of using other people's money to fund his ever grander ambitions. Banks lined up around the block to lend to him, all of them betting on his Midas touch. He was a fixture on magazine covers, a constant presence in the tabloid gossip columns, and the author of a best-selling book that sold his life story as a replicable blueprint for success. He had built an awe-inspiring empire on a foundation of masterful deal-making, massive debt, and dazzling self-promotion. But the very things that powered his meteoric rise were about to trigger an equally spectacular fall. That foundation, as it turned out, was made of glass. By the late 1980s, Donald Trump's ambition had spun out of control, eclipsing even his own legendary capacity for risk. It all came to a dramatic head in Atlantic City with a project so gargantuan, so monumentally expensive, that it would become both the glittering crown jewel of his casino empire and the heavy anchor that dragged it to the bottom of the sea. This project was the Trump Taj Mahal. Billed as the 8th wonder of the world, the Taj was conceived as the largest, most extravagant, most over-the-top casino ever built. Trump, in a typically aggressive move, swooped in and took over the partially completed project from another developer, and then just started pouring money into it with reckless abandon. When it finally opened in 1990, it was a jaw-dropping spectacle of domes, minarets, and 7-story tall elephant statues, adorned with $14 million worth of Austrian crystal chandeliers. But behind all of that dazzling glitz was a terrifying financial reality. The casino cost over $1 billion to build, an unheard-of sum at the time. To finance it, Trump had turned to the riskiest corner of the financial markets, issuing high-yield junk bonds with a crushing 14% interest rate. The math was simply brutally unforgiving. To cover the enormous interest payments on those bonds, the Taj needed to generate what many analysts estimated to be around $1.4 million in revenue every single day from the moment its doors opened. It was a completely impossible target. far exceeding what any casino had ever earned before. The Taj was a masterpiece of glorious excess, but it was also a ticking financial time bomb. Almost from the moment its first customers walked in, it failed to hit its insane, unsustainable revenue goals. The dream was a financial nightmare. The failure of the Taj was the first major crack in the facade of the Trump empire, and very soon that single crack would shatter everything. The massive, insatiable debt from the Taj began to suck the financial life out of his other casinos, which were already struggling in a saturated Atlantic City market. The entire casino operation, once his cash cow, was now bleeding money at an alarming rate. Just 1 year after its grand, star-studded opening in 1991, the Trump Taj Mahal filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. This was the first in a cascade of corporate bankruptcies that would define the darkest chapter of his career. Now, it's important to understand what this means. These were corporate bankruptcies, not personal ones. Chapter 11 is a legal tool that businesses use to reorganize their finances, negotiate with lenders to reduce their debts, and continue to operate. As Trump himself would later say, he was just astutely using the laws of the country to his advantage, like any other major business person. But the dominoes were falling with terrifying speed. In 1992, two more of his prized properties, the Trump Plaza and the Trump Castle, also declared bankruptcy. The Plaza Hotel in New York, his cherished Manhattan trophy, followed that same year, buckling under its own massive debt load. The entire empire was crumbling under a mountain of debt, with some estimates putting the total figure in the billions. In a departure from his usual strategy, he had personally guaranteed hundreds of millions of that debt, putting his own personal fortune on the line in a way he never had before on such a catastrophic scale. The very banks that had once tripped over themselves to lend him money were now his sworn enemies. They put him on a strict personal budget, a deep humiliation for a man whose identity was synonymous with wealth. They forced him to sell off his most beloved toys to stay afloat. The Trump Shuttle airline was gone. His mega yacht, the Trump Princess, was sold. He had to give up huge chunks of ownership in the very casinos that still bore his name, handing over massive equity stakes to the banks and bondholders in exchange for a little breathing room. The man who had symbolized ultimate wealth was, for all practical purposes, broke. The media, which had so enthusiastically built him up into a cultural icon, now took gleeful pleasure in tearing him down. He was no longer the brilliant deal-maker of the 80s. He was a cautionary tale of greed and excess. His reputation was in tatters. For a man whose entire business model was built on the perception of infallible success, this was a potential death blow. By the mid-90s, Donald Trump was an outcast in the world of high finance, a pariah to the banks. He had survived, but just barely. His name was still on the buildings, but his control was gone. His aura of invincibility was shattered, and his path back to the top looked not just difficult, but utterly impossible. In the mid-90s, with his name disgraced in financial circles and his credit with the banks completely shot, Donald Trump had to make a choice. The old way of doing business, borrowing billions of dollars from banks to build shiny new towers, was over for him. That door was closed, perhaps forever. He had to invent a completely new way to be Donald Trump. And what he did next was a pivot so brilliant, so counterintuitive, that it would not only rebuild his fortune, but fundamentally change the very nature of his business. He decided to stop selling real estate and start selling his most valuable and now most controversial asset, his name. This was the birth of Trump, the brand. The strategy was simple, but for him, revolutionary. Instead of taking on all the immense risk and crippling debt of developing properties himself, he would license his name and perceived expertise to other developers for a handsome fee. A developer in Panama, Istanbul, or Toronto could pay millions to put the 5 golden letters, TRUMP, on their new luxury tower. It was pure genius. This model gave him a steady, predictable stream of high-margin, low-risk income. He got the cash up front and the public association with a brand new, gleaming building, all without putting up a dime of his own money or taking on a single penny of personal debt. And it worked spectacularly. Developers around the world paid millions for the privilege, betting that the Trump brand, even a tarnished one, still signified a unique level of luxury that would attract wealthy buyers and command premium prices. But to truly make this licensing model explode, he needed to polish that brand. He needed a way to erase the memory of bankruptcy and remind the world what the name Trump was supposed to represent. He needed a stage bigger than any building he could ever construct. In 2004, he found it. The reality TV show, The Apprentice, wasn't just a career boost for Donald Trump. It was a total ground-up reinvention of his public persona. For 14 seasons, millions of people tuned in each week to watch Trump sitting in a lavish, custom-built, and entirely fake boardroom, playing the part of the ultimate master of the universe. On the show, he wasn't the guy who had just crawled out from under a pile of bankrupt casinos. No, this was a new character, America's boss, a tough, decisive, no-nonsense tycoon who could instantly spot talent and mercilessly cut the dead weight with two simple, devastating words: "You're fired." The show was, in effect, a weekly, hour-long commercial for the Trump brand of success. It presented what one journalist called a highly flattering, highly fictionalized version of himself to a mass audience. The show didn't just make him famous all over again. It cemented his image as a brilliant business genius in the public's mind, regardless of what his actual balance sheet said. The financial impact was unbelievable. Between his salary for the show itself and the dozens of licensing deals that spun off from its success, Trump reportedly netted over $427 million. This massive flood of cash was the lifeblood that allowed him to stabilize his real business empire, which, according to financial disclosures, included covering the very real and substantial losses his golf courses were racking up. He was literally using the money he made playing a successful businessman on television to prop up his actual businesses. With his brand reborn and his pockets full of television money, Trump diversified his real assets. He invested heavily in high-end golf courses, acquiring or developing 17 pristine properties around the world. These were real, tangible assets that, unlike a licensing deal, he actually owned. They became another pillar of his new empire, catering to the same wealthy crowd his brand was once again attracting. This powerful three-part strategy, brand licensing, media stardom, and owning strategic assets, was the engine of his incredible comeback. He had learned a powerful lesson from his near-death experience in the 90s. Perception is reality. He figured out that in our modern media-saturated world, celebrity could be a currency more valuable and more liquid than cash. He leveraged his renewed fame to build a business that was as much about entertainment as it was about real estate. The final evolution of this strategy is playing out right now. In the 2020s, he launched the Trump Media and Technology Group, TMTG, the parent company of his social media platform, Truth Social. By taking TMTG public through a merger, he once again used his personal brand as a magnet to draw a flood of investment from his supporters, creating a media company with a multi-billion-dollar valuation, even with minimal revenue. It is the ultimate expression of his comeback strategy, a business whose value is tied not to its profits or its performance, but directly to the power and popular appeal of his personal brand. The business comeback was complete, but the ambition was not yet satisfied. The immense celebrity and brand power he had so carefully rebuilt through television became the foundation for his most audacious move yet, a run for the presidency of the United States. This was not a sudden whim. Trump had publicly flirted with the idea of running for office for decades, but The Apprentice had given him a new level of mainstream credibility and a direct weekly line to millions of Americans. He had spent years playing America's boss on television. Now he was auditioning for the real thing. His political campaign was a masterclass in the very same tactics that had defined his entire business career. He applied the art of the brand to the world of politics, creating a simple, powerful, and resonant slogan, "Make America Great Again." He dominated media cycles with ease, understanding instinctively that controversy, just like in his tabloid days of the 80s, was its own form of currency. He positioned himself as the ultimate outsider, a successful businessman who could cut through the red tape of bureaucracy and get things done. An image lifted directly from his carefully constructed TV persona. Winning the presidency in 2016 was the ultimate merger of his celebrity and his business acumen. It was, in effect, a hostile takeover of the American political establishment. This pivot fundamentally reshaped his legacy. He was no longer just a real estate developer who became a TV star. His identity and the Trump brand itself became inextricably linked with his 4 years in the White House and his ongoing powerful influence on the political landscape. This move has redefined his place in history, shifting the public focus from his net worth and his skyscrapers to his profound impact on national and global politics. His story was no longer just about the accumulation of wealth. It was about the accumulation of power and how the art of the deal could be applied to the world's most powerful office. The story of Donald Trump's business career is a truly American epic. It is a saga of colossal ambition, catastrophic failure, and a comeback that almost nobody saw coming. He built a towering empire on a mountain of debt, watched it collapse under its own weight, and then, against all odds, rebuilt it on a foundation of pure, unadulterated brand power. His journey is a masterclass in the strategic use of bankruptcy law, the relentless leveraging of celebrity, and the undeniable power of public image. He demonstrated that in today's economy, the story you tell about yourself can be worth far more than the tangible assets you actually own. The bankruptcies that nearly wiped him out were skillfully reframed over time, not as failures, but as smart, calculated business moves. The television show that made him a global star expertly blurred the line between reality and performance, creating an image of success so potent that it became its own reality. From the shimmering glass tower on Fifth Avenue to the fictional boardroom of The Apprentice, and finally to the global stage of political power, Donald Trump's greatest product has always been, and continues to be, himself. He is a figure who seems to understand better than almost anyone that in a world saturated by media, the person who controls the narrative controls everything. His career stands as a towering testament to the idea that in business, just as in politics and in life, a good story can be the most powerful asset of all.